Ist das Format zur deutschen Ratspräsidentschaft und wir haben von der Europäischen Bewegung Deutschland den Titel EBD Briefing bei uns drin. Und willkommen, I have to say now. It is my pleasure to have the Executive Vice President of the European Commission here with us to have a talk, to have a discussion, and that is at the helm and in the beginning of a bigger panel discussion we're going to have inside the Hattie School of Governance. In Corona times, it doesn't matter where we are sitting, it does matter what we are saying, and it is also very, very nice to have this digital issue on the topic here today with a commissioner who has a very high expertise, of course, in competition and for sure also in digital issues, who is for the last period, the last commission responsible for competition inside the EU Commission, but also now in a very obvious part, very important for the European discussion, for European politics, which is called the digital age and competition. And there is a lot ahead. During the German presidency, we are waiting for proposals from the European Commission, which are very, very evident and very important for our day-to-day life, for everybody, for us. But we are also, of course, discussing about details. We have a talk today. I just want to say also some words about the cooperation with the Commission representation here. Dr. Jörg Wojahn is not here with us. He was the representative of the European Commission here in Germany, initiated with the team here also to have this during the German presidency, these Kommission direkt meetings. And that's something what we really voluntarily take over as European Move in Germany to say, listen, we have to discuss with interest groups and stakeholders which are members of us to discuss important proposals of the European Commission and inside the EU legislation process. Vice President, welcome from my side. I hope that we can understand each other here. We have 1 hour to debate also with people in the chat room to see what is possible to be answered, of course. But I would like to get some first words from your side. Of course, it's nothing less than transformation of Europe. You have in your agenda a digital transformation. We all are quite happy when we already work with digitalization for years, that now everybody knows that digitalization might be a very important issue. But couldn't it be smaller as a topic to say transformation, digital transformation of Europe? I mean, Europe is already big, very complex, very diverse. Digitalization is also a big topic, of course. Where do you see Europe now, from now on, the next 10 or 20 years? Where do you want to bring the whole project you are publishing soon?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the welcome, and thank you for hosting this and being with us today. Of course, it's a big question. So just 2 observations. One would be that digital transformation is not about everything becoming digital. It is about trusting the society that we live in to give good solutions. And in doing so, of course, we need to know what we're dealing with. So the second observation is that we really have something to do. Right now, the amount of sort of digital waste, e-based waste, you could call it, it increases by 3 to 5% every year. And only just about 40% of that is recycled. So if we do not change our ways, well, we will just, have piles, mountains of e-waste. So we have to figure out how to deal with that, how to give us as consumers not only the right, but also the possibility that things can be repaired instead of just being thrown away and something new being bought. And also because if we are good at changing the way we use digital technology, well, we can reach at least a 10% reduction of carbon dioxide across all sectors just by 2025. So just these two examples to say, well, digital is an enabler. It's an enabler in the green transition, and it's something that we have to figure out how to make circular. And for me, the fundamentals is that we can trust our society to be a place where we feel at home. And digital transformation can help, make some of these many promises that has been given over the years, like equal access to health or equal access to education. Digital technology can make that come true because we can do so much more when we use digital technologies. So I hope that we can create a society where more people feel at home and counted in, but also that we create a society where we also use digital solutions to be climate neutral.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned now the climate change aspect of the digitalization, which I'm pretty sure that not everybody is aware of in the beginning. There are challenges, of course. There are also ideas where we can go to, and that it can help. I think there's a great part of society who think that this can be very helpful. You mentioned the climate change, but isn't there also something what we can see now in the pandemic, that things are not working? We are not yet able to deal with these issues, and the transformation is not just digital; it's also society wise, so that there's even a bigger picture which has to be changed. It even goes to the education part, isn't it? Isn't it also that part? You're not just the competition expert in the Commission from the last one, but also in the current one. You're not just dealing with climate change and business. You're also dealing with society. Don't you have a little bit of, I use the German word, angst, that this is going to be a very big issue which we cannot easily deal with?
Yeah, but the point is not that things should be easy. The point is that things should be what we want to do. And you are indeed right to say that this is about the entire society, because there's no quick fix that we can just, buy the technology and plug it in and then, boof, everything is good. But if we figure out how to change our society and we do that together, then technology can help us to do what we want to do. And that for me is very important, because if all of a sudden we feel like we're in this film from the, I don't know when, The Matrix, and completely sort of estranged, that we feel that, no, it's not about us anymore as humans and our relationship and things we do. It's just about someone controlling the technology and I'm just a small piece in a machinery, then we'd have failed.
Yeah, it's also about Minority Report. We can all these movies name it, and that is also giving the fear. But this is, yeah. If you say something like, can you name us the factors of this transformation? What are the key points in your point of view when you were writing this? Obviously, must be 90% already in the Commission what you want to publish. So, what are the key factors for the transformation which should be dealt with? Also, given the fact that the Commission has a lot of competences, but not all competences when you want to deal with this.
Well, to start with, an obvious point where we have very little competence is, of course, education. I think everyone has seen now during COVID how some teachers and some pupils, they were able just to change and to be taught in a digital way, while others were losing out completely. We have seen how much it means to have digital skills, just to deal, on a basic level with technology. But also, even in this crisis, there are hundreds of thousands of open positions for people who really know how to deal with digital, sort of IT professionals. Mm-hmm. So education is an obvious first. This is not something nice that we can do on the side. It is, it's a centerpiece that we need to be able to deal with technology and for everyone to do that. And one thing that we have suggested to do is to make such of a certificate, like you can have a language certificate, you can be B1, B2, C1, C2, depending on your level of how you speak the language. Same thing with your IT competences, that you sort of can have a certificate and you can travel Europe so that people will know and recognize your skills. But the second thing is that I think sometimes people underestimate what we have here in Europe, because we have an amazing tradition and culture for industry, for engineering, to make things work on a very complex and very high level. And that, of course, is one of our main assets, that we have this tradition. So I definitely think that it is doable, that not only on a societal level, but also sort of on the business side of things, that we can make the most of it for businesses to thrive while they embrace digitization. Of course, that needs for 5G to be rolled out, that need for data to be made available. And this is, of course, why we prepare legislation to make that happen.
You're visiting Germany now. We just pretend this digitally today. You're visiting Germany and the German EU presidency. And it reminded me a little bit on what you said before, that of course the competences are not all with the Commission. I say, thanks God, it's also fine, because we have different actors dealing with this. But of course you have to have this kind of guiding role. But don't you sometimes to become also a little bit of Angela Merkel, who was also not able to get all the digitalization ideas across when it comes to the German states to implement it on the educational level. I can just not imagine how big task you have ahead when you think about this European-wide. And there was a compliment with Angela Merkel.
Yeah, and thank you. Well, the thing is that first, I don't feel alone because so many more people want to do this. And the second thing is that important things, I guess, in your life, at least in my life, they happen because people close to me said this is important. They didn't happen because someone in the European Commission or the US president or someone else said that this was important. It happened because my teacher said, well, this is important and I think that you can do it. Or sort of the municipality organized a plan to make the city for better use for bicycles. So if we want to change, it's not because of one person on top of a pedestal, it's because that we take ownership and we make that happen with one another. That is where real change is coming from, because then you can engage. Because change travels with people. It doesn't really travel with legislation. That just creates a framework for things to happen.
But just among us, we're just both alone here. Do you like to have this COVID pandemic now around us to say, you see, I told you before, now we have a great plan from the Commission, let's discuss it deeply in the Parliament and in the Council. Is it an advantage or is it still?
No. It can never, ever be an advantage to have a pandemic. Never. Never. Because people die.
But you are just getting a feeling that we need to do a lot more among the citizens. I mean, I can see that in schools even. It's getting better.
Yes, but of course you have to make the best of every situation. But had we been able to avoid it, it would have been better not to have been in a situation of a pandemic.
We'll all go offline, yeah.
Yeah, but now that we're here, well, then better make the most of it. So all of that sacrifice has not been in vain, that those of us who are here take the responsibility to say, okay, we have learned a lot from this awful situation. I would much more have liked to be with you. I would much more have liked to travel to Berlin or Bonn or Baden-Baden, wherever, during the presidency. Because I think we learn much more when we're together. But in this situation, when we have learned so much, I think we have a responsibility to push on to say, okay, fine, then let's make the best of it now that we are in a situation that I think everyone would have wished never had happened.
I jump back on my initial question about 20 years. How will it be in 20 years? What is your vision?
Well, I hope that, for instance, everyone feel that if they get ill, they have access to the world-class health system. That every child, no matter where in Europe, feel that I have, depending on my talent and what I want to do, I have access to the best possible educational system. My point is not that we have a lot of technology everywhere. My point is that we have a lot of human life everywhere, because societies are for humans. Technology is just a helper, as it has been since they invented the steam machine and electricity and what else have you. Because the point is that we as humans can build better societies in 10 and 20 years. And obviously also a society that is better to live in because it's greener, the air is cleaner, biodiversity is not threatened. The things that gives you the framework for a balanced life where you yourself can take your own decisions.
Thanks God you didn't mention Minority Report. It will not be like this. Of course, it's a very positive outcome. Thank you very much. When you get now more into details, I mean, let's say, what are the key points now for the next months, also in the negotiation with, after you proposed it? Initiative is to the Commission, but then you're proposing a trialogue or whatever comes up, decision-making process, a lot of debates, stakeholder involvement. So what are your concrete steps? Where do you want to go now? It's within the German EU presidency, but the EU presidency will end and then go further. Everybody knows. This is a bigger picture, of course, than just the presidency.
Yeah, but for instance, one of the things that we want to do, that we're working on right now, is to make sure that the big platforms, they have a responsibility that sort of equivalent their size. Because in Europe, you're more than welcome to be successful. But with success and power comes responsibility. And for 20 years, we have not they have grown in size, but responsibility has remained here. So we need responsibility to meet the size that they have, on how their platforms work, on how their users get access to their data, that they don't use their power just to outcompete others. That the legislation that we prepare now, of course, we have been discussing the ideas for a long time with the European Council, with the European Parliament. So, of course, I hope that when we are done with the legislative proposal, everyone will dig in to say, well, let's make this happen.
So where do you see the biggest challenges with the Parliament and with the Council? Or they are obviously not monolithic blocks. But where do you see the biggest obstacles?
It's very, very difficult to foresee because the European Parliament is, of course, as diverse as any other parliament, from left to right. Same goes with council members. But what I sense is that no matter what obstacles or problems will arise, I feel that there is a very strong engagement to say, well, we have waited for a long time. We need to catch up with technology to make sure that citizens can trust it. For instance, in artificial intelligence, it's fascinating what you can with an algorithm that can learn by itself, and a number of things can happen. But I think that we will only trust it if we have, quite strict rules to say, well, your algorithm shouldn't discriminate other people. It should not have a bias to prefer some over others. And in that example, I think there's a lot of commitment in the Parliament, in the Council, to say, we will work with you on that to make that happen. And then we will discuss all the details and try to get it right, so that we make the best of technology, but try to get on top of bad things that can happen.
There was a great TV show, no, TV serial or documentary in German TV about a miracle of Brussels, and they referred to the lobbying and decision-making on the EU data protection regulation. Do you expect something miraculous again in this field? Are you hopeful in this?
Well, you know, actually, I tend to trust God, but I don't trust that miracles will happen. I think I think
Digital miracles. Yeah.
I think human efforts will have to be put into it, and I think there will be a lot of lobbying because there are interests on the other side as well. So I think it will take a lot of effort for everyone to make sure that we get it right, to make sure that we as citizens have our rights, but also that smaller businesses have a fair chance of making it also when markets becomes more digital.
Yeah, I can just tell you that we were all surprised, also especially in Germany, about the copyright regulation, how much lobbying went on, and how much this lobbying was always not grey and white and black. It was in many fields different than people expected, and that brings me to the last point. Before I get to the questions, I can see on my phone. It's all digital, of course. When you I understood there's also something on the helmet that you want to go into the direction of EU democracy, and it's a parallel discussion, but I know there's a kind of connection. And there's a German court decision that digital elections should not take place because they are not secure. I can imagine the debate here in Germany about this kind of issues when lawyers are still writing many things on papers in these days. So can you just describe a little bit, because this is especially for the good old, grand old lady European movement, very important to have this connection between digitalization and democracy. How is this interconnected, and how do you plan this to publish it, these two different programs?
Well, I used to be the Minister of the Interior in Denmark, and one of the things that I was pushing was to experiment with digital voting, and I failed completely. I was not able to persuade the Parliament that it could be done in a safe way that could not be hacked, and I learned a lot from that experience, because I think to some degree they're right. It's a very sensitive thing to vote, and the fact that today we have a very simple system that you can see with your own eyes on something so important as to give power to someone. I will give you my voice for the next 5 years. I give you my power for the next 5 years. It's very positive that every voter basically can see with their own eyes what is going on here. And very good that those who are asked to check it, they can actually do that. There's no hocus pocus, there's no black box, there are very physical ways of voting. But there may be other instances where it is convenient to use digital voting. But the most important thing is before we get to vote, that we can actually discuss things, that we can agree on the world as we see it, that everyone feels welcome in the debates. And that is, neither of those three things are actually a given right now. For instance, a lot of women who are active in political debates, they get so much pushback that they say, oh, but I don't want to spend my time debating with other people. Or you have so much fake news that basically you stop believing anything you see. So you don't have a common view of what is actually the world and what is the problems that we need to deal with. And also in general, that we have a way of talking with one another where we don't just shout at each other all the time, but talk in a way and then pause. And in order to be able to listen to other people. So I think to push also where digital can help our democracy, there are quite a number of things that we need to get in control of. Because it is as if we don't have what I think you call in German Bildung for how we deal with sort of the digital parts of our democracy. And we really need that, because otherwise I think a lot of people will just feel that they're not part of it. And this is why we make a democracy action plan later this year to try to address some of these things, of course, with member states, with NGOs, with European movement, with all the many stakeholders who, for whom it's really a matter of the heart that we have a strong democracy.
Yeah, I mean, this is obvious that pluralism can only be ensured if you can organize it and you can get things done. If you just have one room to meet, then pluralism is much less possible, of course. You just brought me to the very last question before I give it to the floor to the audience. We have Europe, and we can also see that from outside Europe, autocracy, but also inside Europe, I have to admit, inside the EU even, democracy is under threat, rule of law. So the digitalization, again, many Democrats are very full of fear that digitalization would lead to kind of more autocracy, fake news. You mentioned it. Can you just give me a little bit of feeling, or us a little bit of feeling of this so-called EU sovereignty towards the world outside? Everything is cold outside. We are the ones, the last standing. Maybe New Zealand and South Korea, but all the rest is really getting into the wrong direction. Is that also part of the Commission strategy of Ursula von der Leyen? Mentioned this EU sovereignty, getting it done to the outside world, that we are doing our job better. Data protection was already getting into this direction. Can you describe this?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that there are still many democracies on our planet. They're not the same as in every member state. They're not the same as the European way of having democracy, but they are still democracies. And I think it's very important to say, well, there is no given template that everyone should be in. We need to work with democracies and still improve them, also with ourselves. The second thing is that I think we have a role as Europeans to say, well, there are things that are important for us that might be of inspiration for others, because the GDPR can also be seen as digital citizens' right. That you as a citizen, when the world becomes more digital, you have rights. You have right to your data, you have the right to be forgotten, you have the right to get your data. And I think that is an idea that is spreading, and is spreading quite fast. And I think with our fundamentals of each and every one of us having an equal, fair right to be here, I think we can push for this understanding that values also will have to be put into regulation as having digital citizens' rights. And the last thing is that with the world as it is, and what we saw under the corona lockdown, it would be good if there are more things that we can do on our own, so that we can take our own decisions. But the paradox here, of course, is that you can only take your own decisions if you can afford it. And European prosperity is created because we're an open continent. So the paradox here is, of course, that if we want to be able to take more of our own decisions, we have to stay open. The risk is if we close ourselves among ourselves, we will be poorer. And that will make it more difficult actually to do what we want to do, because we want to be part of developing amazing technology, and we want to be part of pushing for citizens' rights in a digitalized society. And we want to be pushing for more fairness also when it comes to trade. And obviously, we want to partner up with the rest of the planet to save it from climate change. And I think that is important, that we can, in our heads, have this complexity, that we both want to be stronger on our own, but we also want to be part of a world that becomes stronger.
I get into the debate now and to the questions, and I don't take the first question because I found the second question much more related to what you just mentioned. So there's, of course, the obvious question: European sovereignty, but how will this question of how to be independent from Chinese or US American platforms when we are dealing with the digitalization of Europe? You tried not to put too much on European protectionism, I understood, and I know that you are very vocal on competition. But we have to deal with this question when we're having this topic at the debate. So Tobias Haberichter putting this question especially, what can we do today and in the future to have not just a copy of US model, but to have a European way of doing it in the same time we are also not protectionist?
Well, first and foremost, we do have a European model. You know, I feel unbelievably European when I'm in the US, because I feel the difference so strongly. And one of the things that we have is very strong public sectors, because European member states are welfare states. So you have a state to organize so many more things, but you do that in a transparent manner, and very often you have the market to help you out. But this also means that, for instance, when we start digitalizing public services, well, we develop something that others may need. And the second thing is that we have a very strong culture for engineering, for industry, for machinery, for finding solutions, which is basically what the next chapter of digitization is all about. So we have a lot of potential that is working for us if we believe that we can do things. And this is one of the reasons why I find that there is a good side to this discussion about European sovereignty, because it gives Europe sort of this sense of being more assertive, having more confidence that we have a strong role to play. Because I think a couple of years ago, there was this sort of, oh no, this is such an old continent, and what can we do? And the others have bigger businesses. Instead of saying, now we have something to offer. Next part of this process, this is for us. Now we can do things. And I think that is what we need if we want things to get going.
Well, as a German, I can say and show you that there was a long time, especially in Britain, telling Germans that they are the ill man of Europe and not able to catch up. I see the potential that we are different, of course, but maybe a bit provocative. I mentioned also Chinese. That's come also from Mr. Haberichter. Don't they have the biggest public sector in the world? So aren't they the ones able to use a public sector, however it's organized, to be more competitive than others? I mean, before we were always discussing TTIP discussions with the US, transatlantic, like saying, we have to deal with things differently because we have to liberalize our markets to be competitive. Now China, isn't it a different case?
Yeah, of course, China is a very different case, but it's also systemically a very different case. And my bet would be that also when it comes to public sector services, even if delivered by private companies or delivered by public companies, they would still be better, because they are organized in a way where you have transparency, you have governance models that allows for criticism, for citizens to see through things, for the things that doesn't work, because of course there's a number of things that doesn't work as well, for that to be discussed, for that to be able to surface. I think that pluralism and democracy is one of the strongholds also when it comes to make best use of digital technologies in the long run, but of course depending on your system. Because what I want is for every one of us to feel I am welcome, I'm a citizen, I'm empowered. I'm not just someone who's being under surveillance, having a number of social points that I can spend or not spend. So I think also both when it comes to sort of the specifics in technology, but also when it's the system as such, I think we have a lot to show for a dynamic society, while of course using the pluralism and the transparency and the anti-corruption measures and what else we have for as a driving force.
Mm-hmm. The beauty of digitalization brings me a question from the Canary Island here, from the European movement in Spain. And it's a young student, Miguel Pastor. He's asking about how much will, the surface, let's say Canary Island is nice, but it's still the surface of the EU. How will they profit from digitalization, how this can be done? I show you that I'm living in Berlin Mitte and also have not always access to digital things, but that's another question. So get a little bit more concrete on, please, on the question of how this digitalization can change our continent, the EU, also in all parts of the regions.
Well, I would think that there is a possibility to be much better connected. Now with the Recovery and Resilience Fund, it has been decided on our proposal that 20% of that Recovery and Resilience Fund should be used in the recovery. Mm-hmm. And that is the equivalent, I think, of 134 billion euros. Mm-hmm. And part of that could be for connectivity, because not everyone is well connected. It could be fiber, but it can also be satellite connectivity. And if you're well connected, well, then you have better options in working in a company without necessarily living in the city, or taking an education without necessarily being in the city where it's offered, or having medical advice, even though it's not necessarily offered there. But I still think that we cannot just rely on digital technology to enable us to do better. We also need to be able to travel old school way, to be able to come together, to be able as a tourist to go see things, to be able for people to travel for business. But if we cannot, well, this will supplement what we do. But for me, the main benefits, they are in public services, in health, in education, in how we are served by businesses.
You mentioned the recovery plan, and that was also on my list. Many people say it's a kind of black box now because you have a huge amount of money. In Germany, the debate is quite fair. I have a feeling that we have to do something, and the European Parliament is there, of course, with the Council to deal how to change certain aspects. Are you confident that your program you're proposing is fitting then also to these questions enough, to the financial question, of course, because a lot of money will be spent, and it's not 100% clear how this will be distributed, how you make the backup of it, how to make the absorption capacity possible. We started with big work, big jobs. This is another point, right?
No, but this is very important because in my experience, I also worked as a Minister of the Economy in Denmark, and the unfortunate thing is sometimes it's actually more difficult to spend well than when you have to cut well, because when you cut, you really need to know what is the most important thing, what is most precious, what do I really need to keep, even though I am in a precarious situation. When you spend, you have to figure out how to do that in the best possible way so that we make the most of it. And we are spending next generation's prosperity, or part of it at least. So it's very important that we keep that in mind, that it's not just for us, it's also for the next generation, because a lot of the money will have to be paid back by the next generation. And one of the things we learned from the financial crisis is that it's very important that there is a strong national ownership of the plans. That this is my plan, this is what I want to do. Well, then actually, very often I go do it. But we have agreed on a system where there will be sort of a back and forth. So we have changed the internal organization of the Commission to have a organization that deals specifically with the national recovery plans. So member states make their plan, and we have made some information about what are the criteria, the 37% for green, the 20% for digital, that you should also look into the recommendations from the European semester, your own reform plans. Then that national reform plan comes to the Commission, who will then assess it and then return it. And only when sort of everyone agrees, so that the first tranches from the money from that member state can then be released. And I think, at least that is the idea, that we can create mutual trust in that respect. And we also create a sense of communality, even though member states are in quite different situations. Some are already suffering from quite a lot of unemployment. Even when we're in different situations, that there is a commonality of the direction that we are traveling, because we have these strategic targets of greening our economy and making best use of digital technology, and in doing that, also giving our societies more resilience. Mm-hmm. So we are having this quite granular set up internally to take these, lofty, great ideas and to make them something concrete.
Mm-hmm. I got a question, the first question, so now it fits maybe a little bit better, from Eleonora Weber from Internationaler Bund, and she's asking for about, are there any plans for creating some kind of artificial intelligence oversight bodies, political or economical, within the European Commission? So that is also one big issue, which is ethically also of huge interest for many lobby and advocacy groups.
Yes, we are right now considering how to make the setup so that new legislation on artificial intelligence that poses a risk to our fundamental values, how to make sure that it can be enforced. Because if you cannot enforce it, then why bother? Because it of course needs to be a real thing. But we haven't yet sort of internally found out what will be the best possible way of setting it up. We had a public consultation on our ideas on how to deal with artificial intelligence that poses risk to fundamental values, and we got a lot of, I think, very good input. There were some who they were critical to say, no, we had sort of an idea that it should be sector by sector and some specific use cases. And some said, no, it becomes too complex. You have to simplify more to say, well, it is in these use cases that these specific criteria should kick in. But how to set up the enforcement structure, whether European or in each member state you would have one, that still remains to be seen. But it's highly likely that even with one setup, you would have a national anchor. Because part of what we would do, or part of what industry would do, of course, have a starting point in every member state.
Mm-hmm. There we come again to the point. We're gonna have, it's one question from Dr. Keegan McBride from Herta School, which is now later on discussing many of the topics again on more in depth. Wondering about the cross-border interoperability. I just give you the example. I was just traveling from Sicily to Berlin, and at least the Italian Corona app and the German Corona app seems to be interacting somehow. At least they are promising it now in these days. But he's referring, the question is referring to translation, artificial translation possibilities. Denmark as an example, they are great things, but sometimes, especially when you live in Germany, you always think everything's in Germany, and then there's also some other ideas somewhere else, and let's put it together. Corona app, translation possibilities. there are many things which could have been done already. What is your strategy how to make these things more European from the beginning when you develop it?
Well, that's a very good question.
Questions are always good.
No, but it's because very sort of quickly we sort of retired the idea of make a European Corona app because people said, no, we don't want this. Can we be sure that Europe is now not tracing us? But then, you know, the second challenge was then to say, well, the national Corona apps, how to make sure that they can communicate with one another so that you can actually travel, that you can cross border, because it's such a fundamental thing that you can travel. So many people live in border regions and they go from one side of the border to the other on a daily basis in order to work. So many people travel for a weekend or to see their loved ones. So now we have set up sort of a European gateway system so that member states can use this gateway if citizens who are using the app can actually use that. But I find it somewhat challenging if we should do all European things. To give you one example, I'm very excited about this idea to have a European digital identity, but it should still work as our passports. You know, my passport is Danish and European, and my digital identity should be Danish and European, but it should allow me to identify myself in every member state, also in a digital way, so that I can use public services, banking, go to the pharmacy for my prescriptions, all in a digital manner, while still having sort of this interoperability as one of the basics. And I think that interoperability, that is a very important point in order to also to keep pushing for innovation so that is still relevant because people can actually operate with this system.
So we're running a little bit out of time in the end, which is always good because we can make things sharper. But we tackle big issues, of course. I put one question inside Yasemin Vistuba. I'm reading the questions. Not everybody can see now. Using Skype, and I remember that was from Estonia originally. It's now with Microsoft. People know here in Germany that many countries, especially in the Baltic states and Nordic countries, are much more advanced when it comes to new technology, and they are open for this. How do you would like to make this possible? Is there a process going on to support each other or to create new programs for digitalization in the most important fields? Is that part of the program you are proposing?
Yes, it's part of the program, but it's also what is ongoing now, because I think some of the member states for whom it had not been a priority for quite some years, they are really, you know, now in the catch-up phase. I know in Germany the plans to digitalize public services is like, you know, it's very, very ambitious. It is, and if I look at Greece, what they are doing also very, very ambitious, and what they try to do is, of course, to enable us to use what we use the most. For instance, a lot of public services you use it quite rarely. If you have to sign up your child for schooling, well, you do that once, and if you move, you do it again. But to get us more used to use digital solutions by saying, well, you can pay for your parking, you can get your prescriptions, you can do your banking, you can use digital, and you can identify yourself in a unique manner with things that you do all the time, and that creates a push. And the second thing is that with European funding, we should create European capacities. We have what we call the joint undertaking on high performance computers. So they are being installed already to be sort of a common good, and has already been very useful for learning about the COVID virus, how that behaved, but also to make sort of a digital twin of the human body and a digital twin of our planet, so that you can use simulations to try to figure out what is happening and how would our different solutions actually work. So you get a hunch before you test it out in real life. And of course, it is important not only that every member state is doing well, but also that we have digital capacities in common. And sort of in between those two, that we do digital things at the same time. For instance, we really push for a rollout of 5G, because it's really needed for industry to get that industrial backbone that 5G represents.
That part, I think everybody underlines, from the Canarian Island we had just here until also here in Berlin Mitte. That part is involving money, 5G going on, the Chinese question we don't have to mention now here on this, but I think this is somehow for consumers and for industry at the same time very important. I have a question from Peter Bier, Managing Director of the Waving Cat, funny name, but probably very, very good. Are there currently any concrete plans to implement some type of European consumer seal of trust for emerging technologies like artificial intelligence? There we come back a little bit like this. You're talking about passport, digital passport, but maybe to put it kind of from the other side, to have a seal of trust. Is there any plan involved?
Yes, it was one of the ideas that we consulted on. If you provide artificial intelligence, that you can sort of sign up to say, I live up to these different criteria. And if I do that, well, then I get this seal of trust. Now we're trying to figure out if we can also put it into the legislation. But that was exactly one of the ideas that we consulted on, so that you can say, well, you have artificial intelligence where you say, well, this is not voluntary in any way, because we want to make sure that there's no risk of discrimination or a bias, for instance. But there may be sort of things in between where we say, well, yes, it's still important, but the rest of legislation will apply to that. But maybe someone say, but we want to sign up to be a really trusted partner. And then you could have this mechanism to say, if you live up to these criteria, then you get sort of the label of artificial intelligence to be trusted.
We are getting now in the phase, well, last 3 months of the German EU presidency. That's why we're here. This is the occasion, let's say. But of course, we are getting to the next year. We are trying to cope with COVID, of course. Everybody's personally and professionally struggling with it. No doubt about it. Nobody is easily going through this. Some better, some less. When you get now out of, for the next year, just to see in the what kind of debates you would like to have on this issue. Also, we mentioned a little bit pluralism, controversial ideas, consultation processes the European Commission wants to do but has to do also, and is doing it very much. Are you confident that you get this kind of great debate? I refer back again to the data protection regulation. I still call it a miracle because it was well done by all different actors.
Yeah, you know, for anyone who takes an interest in legislation, this is going to be, I think, the best time of their life. Because we have the Digital Services Act, Digital Market Act, Data Governance, the Data Act. We have the entire debate about digital tax also coming up. We have the legislation on artificial intelligence, just to mention what is sort of within the next 6 months or something like that. Then we have legislation on foreign subsidies, and so a lot of legislation ongoing, and that's a very important debate. But it's also important to say, well, what can we do here for this actually to advance? Because now we have a resilience and recovery facility that is supposed to be used for change to happen right now on ground, for instance, for connectivity. So one doesn't feel disconnected, no matter if it's Berlin Mitte or the Canary Islands. And I think even in digitization, there is a lot of room for NGOs, for businesses to engage, to make sure that it actually happens on ground in every member state, because that is really important, that push to make it happen. That doesn't come with legislative proposals by themselves.
Executive Vice President, I thank you very much, Tack, for being with us, to be here in Berlin with us on the Canary Island in the same time. I wish you all luck, all fortune for the work. I know professionalism is there, but of course you are on the high sea when it goes to legislation, like always. This is part of democracy. I'm very glad that we have this cooperation with the Hertie School of Governance, and they have this Hertie School Center for Digital Governance now going on. There will be a small film now after my words, and I'm very glad that Lisa Witter is taking over the moderation. She will explain also who is on the panel for this. But of course, it will also deal with the points what we had already tackled a little bit, the competition, which is also not bad, competition between Europe, China, and the US when it comes to the digital economy, digital society in the end of the time. What are your last words to wish to the German presidency, to the German stakeholders, the people here in Germany, but also all over Europe, how we could deal this, how we can make these visions you were mentioning in the beginning possible? What are your wishes in these points? And then you have the last words for you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I think this is very helpful that we get to discuss it. And I think the push from the German presidency when it comes to digitization has been extremely helpful, because for the first time for years, the European Council has been discussing digital issues. It's a full program from the European Council with the endorsements of the plans that we have. And the second thing is that I really, really hope that we can have, the openness to learn. Because I don't think that we will feel in control if we do not have the skills to deal with digital technology. And I think that is such a good thing, because we will have a renovation wave of houses for the greening of our economy. But if we could also have sort of a wave of Bildung, sort of the culture of digitization, the culture of a democracy supported by digitization, and the skills to deal with it, then we could empower our society to make so much better use of digital technologies and never, ever feel frightened by the machine, because no one should feel that way. Everyone should feel, I am part of this, and I'm part of the control of the technology in our society.
Margrethe Vestager, thank you very much for this and for this oversight. And I wish the colleagues from the Hertie School of Good Governance all the best for the panel discussion later on. And we're going to see now a movie, and see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
New technologies and digitalization have become the major drivers of societal change. They affect nearly all aspects of our personal life, but also have very broad policy implications in nearly all policy domains.
European policymakers are currently making crucial decisions about the power distribution between government, corporations, and society in the digital sphere.
The changes that digitalization comes with require academia, politics, leaders across the board to revisit some of the most basic fundamental questions of how government, state and society are organized.
So what we study at the Center for Digital Governance is how can we bring all these efforts to the future? How can we recognize the challenges that have come up and how can we address them? But also, how can we flourish better? We have more opportunities now, we all have more power, and that's something that we should be excited about.
We stimulate public discourse on digital transformation.
We provide non-partisan evidence on the challenges but also benefits of digital transformation to achieve public good.
We study how bureaucracies deal with digital transformation We also look into how governments can adopt new technologies to improve policymaking. We study the nature of intelligence, both natural and artificial, and we work on the spread of hate speech and disinformation online over social media. And finally, we also look at how open data enables new forms of public services.
We at the Center for Digital Governance understand digital governance as the interplay, the set of decision-making processes, of rules, regulations, structures, which all together drive and shape digital transformation. And this is clearly beyond government. Government is a key actor, but it needs the interplay of government with non-governmental actors.
It's so important right now because the world is changing so fast. You need academics to help us understand how it is the society is changing. What we're really talking about is trying to benefit everybody. Governance is about how do we coordinate for ourselves, and then how do we connect the different selves together.
Which is why we want to create a space at the Center for Digital Governance to challenge each other, to bring in the experiences and perspectives of the different disciplines to answer these important questions for the future of governance.
Things change so fast, you need more and more research. You need to be able to monitor that. It's not just about the past anymore, it's so much about the future.
Hello. Ready to go? Okay, welcome everyone joining from the live stream. That was an excellent fireside discussion, ranging everything from education to democracy to digital identity. Very excited to have you joining us online in this crazy time of Corona to launch this digital center at Hertie. I'm Lisa Witter, the co-founder of Apolitical, and I'm going to be your moderator for this next hour. Now, we really, while we're launching the center, we're sitting here in an EU office. We really want to build a community of those of you who are interested. So if you are joining us via the live stream, get ready to vote via some polls and also do some interactive work. So to kick us off to hear a little bit more is the Deputy President of the Hertie School, Mark Halleberg. Mark.
I'll say hello from Berlin Mitte, but from Friedrichstraße as opposed to the European Commission delegation. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure, in fact, to welcome you to the first of two launch events of the Hertie School's Center for Digital Governance, which focuses on challenges to digital governance. We have been talking about different centers of competence here at the Hertie School for some time, and I'm delighted to see this one indeed have its formal launch event. I should say that this afternoon's event has been arranged in cooperation with the representation of the European Commission in Germany, as you can tell indeed with Lisa's background in terms of how this runs. It focuses on regulatory questions in digital governance, but this is one event only. There'll be a second event that will also take place on October 29th, and will draw connections of digital governance to the field of sustainability. So I hope you also come back for that one as well. Let me just say a few things in terms of the center itself. This is a center that was formally created in 2019, so this is freshly baked, as one can say. In terms of its goals, you saw something already in the video, but it is really to conduct academically rigorous research, to provide a leading world-class education, and to contribute to societally relevant policy insights. These are three of the different parts that are integral to what it is that the center is doing. I should say, I think these are rather important and critical topics in terms of how this runs, especially when we think about the fact that Germany currently has the presidency of the European Union, and that there are some decisions that are coming up in this respect. I was told to say one or two words about what's coming up in terms of the afternoon discussion. There are a few key questions that are coming, but Lisa, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder here. But I'll mention just two. How does the European approach differ from the roads taken by the United States and by China, by two major powers, you could say, when we think in the digital world? And the second is, how can decision-making in the digital realm be coordinated in Europe in order to foster public well-being? Well, today's topics will go into these topics, and let me just say one final thing, which is, I guess there's some poetic justice that we're opening up a digital governance center digitally. welcome again that you've logged in to talk and to follow this. And I really like this idea as well, that there'll be some bottom-up parts to this too, where you'll have a chance to vote. So I look forward to seeing how you all vote. So Lisa, let me turn over the floor back to you.
Thanks, Mark. I think we can share thunder. These are big enough questions that we can address them several times. And I think it's appropriate to kick off, following off of you, to actually hear from some students with their reactions to the fireside chat. Well, why is this important? Well, number one, hält is a place for research, but is also a place full of great students who come to the capital of Germany, very international group, to answer some of these hard questions. And also, if you think about a lot of students these days, they didn't quite grow up with a handy in their hand, but they are the ones using technology and will be thinking about technology longer than some of us older generations or some of the people who are doing the policy work right now. So we have two students who are going to give a reaction, one from California and one from the UK, so one from Europe and one from the center of where a lot of this tech started. So Maxwell Phillips, welcome Maxwell. He is from California, but has been living in Germany for 4 years now. He's a second-year candidate for the MIA at the Hertie School that is not missing in action. He's very much in action. And prior to his studies, he worked for a global innovation platform and is an investor in Plug and Play. So he's been in the tech world, but then also thinking about the tech world. Now, I'll introduce the second one, then I'll turn it over to each of them. We have Rachel Griffin, really warm welcome, Rachel, from the UK. She has a bachelor's degree in law, so we'll bring that legal perspective from the University of Oxford, and is in her second-year master's here in the Public Policy School at Hertie, after studying for a year at Sciences Po in Paris, so may bring some of that French perspective to that. So Maxwell, you each have 2 minutes to, what are your reflections hearing from the fireside chat? Over to you.
Okay, I believe we're going to let Rachel go first, so I'll hand over the table to Rachel.
Okay, thanks, Maxwell, and thank you for the introduction, Lisa. It was so interesting to hear that speech from the Executive Vice President, and I think it was really good to hear a European leader articulating such a positive vision for digitalization in Europe, which really centers around equality and the quality of public services. So myself and the other students are really optimistic about the European model that she described, where new technologies are implemented in a transparent way, in a way that's more democratic. We think there's so much potential for these technologies to help improve public services, to enforce regulations, and to serve the public interest. But we also have some concerns that incorporating these new technologies into public services can also mean handing over control of important infrastructure, of sensitive data, for example, to private tech companies. And a lot of the discussion so far around the Digital Services Act seems to have focused on competition and opening up the market in technology, which is obviously really important. But maybe we could also in Europe be thinking more outside the box and start thinking about other ways that digital technologies could be managed in the public interest that are not just about relying on market forces. We also see often in Europe that digital technologies are often used not really to combat inequality and empower people, but to entrench existing power structures. For example, we see in Europe facial recognition being used to track populations that are considered suspect. We see AI being used to flag supposedly suspicious claims to social security. And this is not really living up to the technology's potential to empower people and to promote inequality and access to services for everyone. So something that we would really love to hear more about from the panel is how the EU can take Europe in the direction of using digital technologies to really serve everyone and to promote equality and empowerment, and not just to maintain existing power dynamics.
Rachel, thank you very much. We were struck listening to the fireside chat, for those who joined us for that it was really from a place of first principles. Like, what do we really want to do first, and the technology followed? So we're going to be talking a bit more about that. We're going to hear from Danny Stockman in a minute. She has deep expertise in China. And Rachel, I wonder if it's an accident that over your shoulder we see panda bears in Chinese. I wonder how to get the Chinese perspective in this European conversation. So let's go from the UK to China, but back to Germany. But Maxwell, you with your Californian, super interesting, your investor perspective as well. What are you thinking about the fireside chat, and what insights do you have or questions you want us to cover?
I think that in the fireside chat, there were 3 different elements of more of an industrial European digital policy that were discussed. And I just want to kind of touch on some of the elements that the other students and I, when we huddled, thought were the most important. So the 3 elements, there's kind of this foundation of education that is critical to building a digital society. The second is to have more of a digital infrastructure. And I mean, this is the hardware. So having 5G networks and things like this. And then the third element is the services that are running across this digital infrastructure here in Europe. And so what was brought up in the fireside chat was making sure that Europeans can have a digital education. And this was really paramount throughout the discussion. And we absolutely agree. But we also want to make sure that there's a place for these students to go after they've completed their education. So are there connections to investors so that students who have an idea for digital service can be connected to see out their entrepreneurial vision? And the second piece that we would really like to see is to have the companies be more connected to the education system. So actually we can have a digital pipeline for students to go enter the digital economy here in Europe. And when we're talking about digital infrastructure, there's a lot of talk in the media right now, obviously, about Huawei and 5G. And beyond security concerns, to have Europe really be successful in the future, it's really important to have European companies that are making the hardware. This supports European jobs. It supports European education, of course, as well, as we can have a more engineering ecosystem. And so it's really important that Europe ensures that it's not left behind technologically when the next evolution in digitalization takes place. So by investing in European companies now that create this digital infrastructure, we can ensure a European digital future going forward. And lastly, there's the services that run across these networks. And a lot of these services that we use right now are obviously run by US firms. And this is everything from Facebook and Instagram, but also to things like Amazon Web Services and data storage platforms that a lot of companies use. And the relations with the United States are not going very well right now. And so we really wanted to know if Europe is prepared to manage the relationship with the United States going forward to ensure access to these platforms going forward. And secondly, if relationships sour to the point where maybe this access is threatened, what are the alternatives that Europe can think of? Maybe building European alternatives to some of these services is one idea, but that's also not necessarily realistic in a free market economy when this is something that Europe has not invested in yet whatsoever. So these are just some things that we wanted to prod the European community to think about when it comes to digital transformation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. An optimistic set of questions and observations about the role of Europe with some cautionary tale about what the relationship will be going forward with places that hold some of this technology. We are less than 30 days out from a big election in the United States. Politics does matter. So we'll see what happens with that. So thanks for that. We'll get back to some of these really fundamental, again, first principles. Is it for making sure that the power stays, or is it opening up power? How do you do education for all, creating pipelines for jobs? Really, really good questions that we'll get to. I find in these conversations, though, we'll have very little time, and the devil's often in the details around the how. So hopefully our panelists will get a little bit detailed and not so general that, yes, we need to do this, but what are some concrete ways to do that? Okay, thanks for the students. We're going to be hearing from a couple more students here coming up. But I really want to turn to some people who live and breathe this every day from different perspectives to give their thoughts on where we're at. So I'm going to go over the questions, but I'm going to introduce you first. So if you could wave when I say your name. So Prabhat Argal. Prabhat, could you Can you wave? He's currently working on the European Commission's policies and regulations in the field of online platforms and electronic commerce, so right at the heart of all of this stuff. Each of these people have a really long bio. I'm just going to keep it super short so we can get to their brains and we can look up their bios online. Margrethe Vestager. Margrethe, could you smile? I've been watching Margrethe. I know Margrethe for a long time, deeply committed to this European way. She is now, after leaving politics for quite some time, she's left politics where she's been a huge advocate of human rights and working on these digital issues. I was really lucky to co-chair an Agile Governance Council with her and learned a lot from Margrethe. She's the International Policy Director at the Stanford University's Cyber Policy Center and International Policy Fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth using your favorite search engine. Notice I didn't give anyone a plug there. And look at a New Yorker profile of her and her experiences, which I hope we're going to hear about pretty soon, about living in America. The vice president talked about how she feels so European when she goes to the US, and I think we'll hear that from Margrethe as well. Then last but not least, in the studio, but socially distanced from me here in Mitte, we're following our protocols as you all should, is Daniela Stockman. She goes by Danny, is professor of digital governance at the Hertie School. I don't think it's an accident that she's wearing red. I don't think that's promotion necessarily of the country she knows a lot about, but she has spent a significant amount of time thinking and being in China. I know you were with Steinmeier officially on his trip, and so looking at that way, the Chinese way, what might the European way, what might be an American way. And just recently, Margrethe has put out a piece in the MIT review worth, again, using your favorite search engine to look up, on what a global way might look like. So let's get into it with the question, then I'm going to go back to the audience. Under the German presidency, as we've heard from Mark Hallerberg, the European Union will make some really critical decisions on the development of what this European model is, the European way forward. How might this approach differ from that taken, again, by the US or China? And how can decisions in the digital realm be organized in Europe in such a way that it fosters public well-being? So how to really engage people in this way, in this democratic way to do that. So I've asked each of our panelists with some discipline to start off with a one-word response and then a 2-minute explanation about what that one-word response is. I'm going to ask you watching to put in your one-word response too for what is the European way forward. I'll come back and make some comments on that. So I'll start here in the studio with me wearing red. She's going to talk about China. What is the Chinese way in a word, and explain sort of how you see this working with the European way. Danny.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that the vice president started off by saying the European way was to have a strong public sector. I would instead say the Chinese way is to emphasize state. So to me, digital governance sets out the formal and informal decision-making processes that determine the power between state, society, and corporations in the digital realm. And China is very strong in terms of putting a state-centered approach forward. But I would say that oftentimes the misperception about China is that China has a very top-down approach, whereby the state pretty much develops ideas like the social credit system and then tells corporations what to do. But my own research shows that that's actually not the case. Alibaba developed the social credit system that then later was picked up by the Chinese state and made into policy.
So you would say the European approach is more stakeholder, if there was a word, focused, where it's more sort of corporate driven in the Chinese model, Danny?
So to me, the difference is that yes, I think the vice president is right. Of course, the public sector is more important, but the state in Europe really has the role of setting the circumstances in order to empower society and corporations to take initiative. So it's more about, I think it's more of a role of creating the conditions, the right conditions.
condition setting. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone in the chat. This isn't a normal chat that you see. It looks like a questions and answers. So go ahead and put in your word or what you want to add to this conversation. I'll call you out through the conversation. I'm going to go over to you, Prabhat. We're talking about Europe. What is the one word? Do you agree with Danny? Is Danny wrong about the way she sees this, about the European way forward? Are you there, Prabhat? Oh, he's muted. I see. It's not a web conference if someone doesn't talk when they're muted. You feel comfortable. It's like a feeling of home. Here we go.
I think I've been unmuted. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think the one-word challenge is really tough for me because the beauty of Europe is just the diversity of ideas and different concepts. But if I have to pick one, it would be fairness. That's really the one word that I would hold up very high. It's really the kind of guiding concept for what we're doing. A fair balance and in fair dealings. Happy to expand on that later.
Fantastic. Fairness. Again, first principles here. Margrethe, how about you?
I would say rule of law. One, because I think it is the anchor, and two, because I think it should always be central in how regulation takes shape, not to attack technology, but really to uphold principles, as the Vice President also mentioned. And happy to expand as well. But thanks for having me.
Great. Good. Really to the point. I like it. So now we're going to hear from a few more students, and then we're going to come back to our panel. So let's over to the video to hear from more students.
And I'm from Bulgaria. I would really like to see for the Commission putting forward the question of how social platforms influence our interpersonal relationships. With the inclusion of the digital in our private lives, we're faced with ethical dilemmas on a new level, namely that our whole lives are on the record. Data doesn't belong just to us or the platforms, it belongs to other persons as well. I would really hope that we can address issues such as revenge porn, cyberbullying, and cancel culture. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marcelo Lozada, and I'm a lawyer from Colombia. I'm a second-year student of the MPP at the Harris School. So I think the Commission should come up with an overarching narrative of the European Union values in the digital age. It means thinking about a multi-stakeholder approach to empower government, civil society, and companies on equal footing. Moreover, in terms of content-specific topics, I would like the Commission to focus on the development of new algorithms that address the social disruptions we are experiencing today. For example, the spread of fake news, hate speech, or clickbaiting, among others. So definitely be among the priorities of the Commission.
Hi, my name is Thomas Jeston. I'm a first-year MPP student at Hardy School of Governance, and I come from Toronto, Canada. A robust and effective European digital strategy is one which protects public and private sector privacy, harmonizing policy across what is a complex political and bureaucratic structure. Accountability for enforcing and complying with regulations should be clear and cost-effective for all participants, while also maintaining low barriers of entry to foster startup innovation. The intricacies of digital governance demands innovative, efficient, and transparent tools such as blockchain and AI to detect non-compliance in a comprehensive and timely manner.
Well, fantastic. It's a great segue to our next question, talking about regulation and enforcement. And this is my next question to the panel. We're going to do a bunch of quick fire questions here. And again, please engage with us in the chat so we can, or in the Q&A part, which serves as a chat. In a word, I'm going to start with you, Margrethe, because you started off with rule of law. In a word, what's the biggest challenge do you see in regulating the internet? It's easy to say, oh, we should regulate the internet, but what is the biggest challenge, and explain why? Margrethe.
Well, I don't think we should be regulating the internet. I think we should be regulating for principles. And sometimes that may include, ensuring that, for example, antitrust rules are upheld in the digital world, or non-discrimination principles. But I think the idea that we're regulating the internet is putting the wrong priority first, and allows companies to imply that they are under attack and that they are unjustly regulated. But I agree with Prabhat, it's about fairness. And it's about time that tech companies are going to be fairly regulated because they've basically escaped regulation for a very long time.
Well, fascinating. So Margrethe, you're saying that the narrative maybe is being won by them by saying, hey, regulating, I know a lot of tech companies had called for regulation, right? Regulate us. This is some controversy over some of this. You're saying don't follow in that regulates frame. Let's take the frame of like upholding laws and having principles, right? So switching that narrative, really, really interesting. George Orwell says that politics is communications, and you just proved that right there with just reframing some of the language around that. Prabhat, how about you? What is the biggest challenge to regulating or not, if that's not the question anymore, in a word, and if you could explain why?
Well, I mean, I think just three aspects that I'd just like to briefly mention. One is, I think a lot of the students who've come in, they've highlighted the kind of richness and complexity of things that we need to look out for. So it's not just about regulation. It's many of the students came in saying we need to support also innovation, blockchains, we need to have startups, get access to money, think about investors, think about where students are going to learn, how they're going to learn, and what they're going to do afterwards. So just to say that all of these things are also on the mind of the Commission. So it's not just about regulation. I think it would be a mistake, first of all, if we narrow the conversation only to what we should regulate and what we should not regulate. That's my starting sentence, and I'm happy to put some links into the chat in case others can see that. Now, the second thing, the biggest challenge in regulation is at European level. I think it's not, let's not start with the challenge, let's start with the opportunity. The opportunity is to lay down exactly the rules, like Margrethe said, that reflect our values in terms of fundamental rights protections, in terms of rule of law, that really should govern our digital space. And this is really, these are really the words of Commissioner Breton, is to kind of take ownership of the digital space that we have and lay down common rules that are consistent with our fundamental rights and are consistent with our kind of ideas of how this space should be governed. So that's the opportunity. So my first point was about the bigger challenge. Regulation is only one part, and maybe just the smallest and least important part of the whole conversation. The second one is that regulation is above all, I see it as an opportunity, because also, like many of the students have said, who've come in, is that there is a real opportunity to have laid on better and stronger protection for things like privacy, where Europe has been a pioneer, but also for illegal content online, like some of the things that have been mentioned. Now, to come to the challenge is that, well, we are a continent of 27 different countries, many different cultures, and of course the variety of different uses of digital services online is enormous and reflects the whole rich variety of our society. And of course, the challenge comes to that is to kind of identify what are the ground rules that make sense for everybody across the whole continent and that bring us all together.
Prabhat, let me follow up. I like your opportunity-minded approach, sort of glass more than half full. You talked about, though, the challenge being about these 27 different member states. So what's the opportunity and the diversity for the EU to handle this? Where's the silver lining there?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the approaches that we're taking, and it comes back to what Margrethe said, is that are we really regulating the internet? What are we doing here? You know, one of the objectives that we have with the Digital Services Act is not so much to say what should be online and what should not be online. That's something that is really not for a government, certainly not for the Commission to decide in a way. I think what we really are thinking about is that what are these procedures that we should have? You know, it's a little bit like going to a concert hall. You know, you expect there to be a fire extinguisher, a fire exit, an alarm button everywhere. And our approach is really to be sure that the safety infrastructure online is available for all digital services, and that this safety infrastructure is designed in such a way that it doesn't interfere what kind of music is being played in the concert hall, what kind of speech is being given. So that's just an analogy, and I think this is something that we can all agree on across, because it doesn't seek to harmonize or to kind of make a kind of uniform layer of bringing all of common standards to something that is kind of deeply rooted in different cultural traditions. So there may very well be some areas where we all agree that some types of content are illegal and they need to be outlawed across the whole continent. But the way to bring all countries and all cultures and all different users together, I think, is by putting the user first, by making sure that they have safety buttons available and safety procedures, that there is an accountability framework around some of the negative externalities that we now come across, particularly in the space of large online platforms. This was something that the Executive Vice President mentioned as well. And I think that these are all very broadly consensual at the moment.
It's really great. Are you a musician, by the way? I love the music metaphors. Are you a musician?
I like Wojahn said, a lot of enthusiasm, but no talent.
I have a feeling there's more to probe there, but I'm going to go to some comments here from Anonymous. Just on the one word, it's really appropriate to bring in here. This person says, the one word on the European way is people-focused. Explanation, it's different than the US, that's business, successful business focused, and China focused on the party success, and the EU's way forward should and will be people-focused. Equality, fairness, privacy are core values that will be upheld in the future. We heard that through the students. We've been hearing that here. Danny, there's a lot of interest here in the chat around the Chinese way. I started off asking Margrethe and Prabhat about what the challenge was. Prabhat did excellent ninja move and said, I want to talk about the challenges. So you get to talk about the challenges as well as the opportunities in regulation.
Well, so I work on the political consequences of digital technology, so especially social media and the challenge that they may bring by catalyzing and contributing to disinformation, fake news, all the political instability we've been observing also in Europe, but also in China. And it seems to me that in Europe, the biggest challenge right now is that the dominant approach towards dealing with these issues really focuses on what the companies originally came up with as an idea to deal with it, which is based on what's called content moderation. So trying to delete or block content. But to me, that really cures the symptoms, but not the causes. And in my work, I find a very strong relationship with the targeted advertising-based business model and these outcomes. So to me, the biggest challenge right now is to address the root causes of these issues, which are related to the business model.
So I want to go to our first polling question, and you're going to see it pop up on your screen. And the question is, how many years are we talking about until good governance catches up with tech? Now, let's think of governance, just to all of the panelists' point, beyond just regulation. This is a bigger bucket, right, than just regulation. How long is that going to take? 20 years, 15 years, 5 years, 10 or 2. So I'll give you a minute to answer that. How long is this going to take? And then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to say how long they think it's going to take. So I don't want to influence their voting too much. See what they're going to say. I'll give you a minute. Thanks for the questions coming in. A lot of anonymous people coming in. We have, yep. I want to get to some developing countries questions that we have coming on. Things around India, and I know you're going to talk a little bit more about China. Okay, Sebastian, how are we doing on our polling? Is it coming through? 1 more minute, Sebastian says. So Margrethe, I'm just going to go to you while we're waiting for this 1 minute of voting. I know we talked about 3 different ways: the Chinese way, the European way, and the American way. You have a new piece out in the MIT Review about a global way. Can you just give us a little preview about what that global looks like and where you see the EU fitting into that?
Yeah, so in the article, I make the case that essentially, even though this 3-way division is often cited, I mostly still see 2-way. One, in the democratic world, where I think thus far companies have had too much space to govern. And the second model in the sort of authoritarian space, top-down, state-driven, control-oriented governance model. And my plea is more for a cross-border democratic governance model for technology, which should also address the question from the audience about including the global south. I think for a long time, the EU or European countries and the US have been leading in developing a rules-based international order and building the institutions that went along with it. And somehow, we can talk about it longer when we have time, they've kind of hit the pause button when it came to the digital world, presumably hoping that the technologies themselves would have liberating effects, would enhance freedoms, would empower people, would emancipate individuals. And we now have too many lessons learned to conclude that that has not materialized. The promise does not automatically lead to success. And so I think it is vital, especially as democracy is under enormous pressure, that there is deliberate rulemaking, deliberate principle protection, deliberate institution building to also govern with a democratic focus in the digital world. And so I'm hoping that the EU in this case can take the leadership when it comes to finding new allies, working together across the world. Surely the transatlantic relation is still important, even though we're going through difficult times. But for a democratic model to really take hold, it needs to be global.
Great. I want to go into that a little bit more, Margrethe, particularly the question on institution building. What does that mean? Because that sounds interesting. So I want to give you the poll results. I'm going to ask you all what your thoughts are. So with the audience, the least was 2 years. And then there's a tie between 20 and 15 for the next lowest, then 10. But the winner with an optimistic crowd here was 5 years by quite a lot. So we're talking about good governance in the internet in 5 years. Danny, I'm going to ask you, what was your thought? What was your number about how long it was going to take to get this underhand in a better way with all the principles we've talked about?
I was with the 5 years.
Okay. And why? Why? That seems fast to me. Why? That seems like unbelievably fast. How can that happen?
Because I think currently the European Union is committed to making decisions, and corporations are going to respond very quickly.
Okay. There's commitment driven. We heard that from the Executive Vice President. Values, first principle based. Prabhat, how many years are you looking at until we have a good governance system?
It's a tough question because I think we're kind of simultaneously there already and we'll never be there. So it's something between now and infinity. I think just kind of what do we mean by good governance? I think that one of the things that maybe if we kind of have five elements that are really important to me personally. I think transparency of decision making, inclusiveness and balance of decision making, accountability of the decision making process. But at the same time, also kind of the rule of law element that Margrethe mentioned right at the beginning, fundamental rights compliance, and also technological savviness. I mean, those five elements are, for me, right, the kind of the five elements of good governance in the space where we are regulating. And this is a kind of aspirational goal that you never quite reach perfectly because every part of this is kind of constantly shifting. What we mean by transparency changes all the time. Inclusiveness and balance, we understand how hard it is to kind of reach all sorts of stakeholders, how the stakeholder community shifted and skewed towards those who have more means to influence and to have their voice heard, and how hard it gets to kind of reach people who might be affected. And this links to the inequality point that one of the students made right at the beginning. Accountability is also an ever-evolving concept. We thought that transparency could substitute for accountability to transparency reports and more data, and now we understand that people are really kind of overloaded. What we're looking for is meaningful transparency. So I think it's an ever-evolving thing, and it's very difficult for me to put a time on it. But I think a more important conversation is that what do we mean exactly by good governance? And I just threw out some ideas there.
Thanks very much, Margrethe. How about you? How long, with all of the caveats that's always changing, but when you ask a person in the know, there's good governance going on in technology relative today, how many years do you think?
I think the next 10 years will be really important, but I also recall when I just started as a freshly elected member of the European Parliament a little over 10 years ago, that the digital single market was the big new vision. And I couldn't wait to get it finished. I thought we had no time to lose. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who saw me getting all excited and, impatient and ready to roll. And I remember very well that he said, "Oh, relax, breathe in, breathe out." in 10 years, we will still be talking about a digital single market. And at the time, I thought that was the most cynical thing I heard in a long time. I thought, oh my goodness, this is why politics has to change. But lo and behold, it's actually true. We're still talking about the digital single market. We're also talking about a lot of other things, which I think is great. But these things take some time. So I would say 10 years is realistic, but I do believe that the next 10 years will be crucial for Europe in setting the tone, setting the parameters, and I can only hope that I'm wrong and that it will be done in 2 years.
Margrethe, thanks for that. I've been asking this question all summer. I was with policymakers, both political appointees as well as staff, public service staff from around the world, and the 10 years was the number that most of them had. And one issue that Margrethe and I have talked a lot about is this trade-off between inclusion and lawmaking and speed in lawmaking, and you can feel that tension. You heard Prabhat talking about multi-stakeholders. It takes time to hear and listen to people, so that's the difficult trade-off we have in good governance, speed versus time. I'm going to go to the audience for another poll question. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very certain, to 1 being very uncertain, do you think the European way will win out? Now, I know, Margrethe, you put something on the table that it has to be global, but let's answer that question later. But the European way that Prabhat's laying out with these principles that you all have talked about. The poll should come up in a minute, and you're going to put 10 is very certain, is that we're going to do this, lots of optimism, you heard it from the students, all the way down to 1, and we'll talk about that in a minute. While people are voting, though, I'm going to go to you, Danny, and where are you on that number? Try not to let this influence you in your number, but Danny, where are you on the European way? Very certain, not certain?
I am pretty optimistic, I have to say. I give it an 8.
An 8? Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty optimistic, mainly because I think Europe can play digital Aikido, which means making a weakness into a strength. We don't have a very strong European digital sector, which has allowed us to enforce GDPR, and I think we can also be bold in terms of some of the regulations. But I also have, I know it's very challenging. So, and we also have threat from authoritarian elements within Europe. So I'm giving it an 8.
An 8. Prabhat, how about you?
I'm also optimistic. I think 8 sounds right. Because there's a little 2 points for modesty at the end there. But just I want to repeat the point I just made in response to the previous poll. Let's not fool ourselves that there's an end point here. There's a kind of clear point when we can say we've done it and it's over and it's finished. This is an ongoing process. There's a transformation going on. It's really a kind of deep revolution. It'd be a bit, I think, wrong and maybe even misleading to think that there's a kind of a moment when it's done and we're ready and we move on to something else. I think that here in the digital transformation that the Executive Vice President spoke about, it's also about, the goal is also the path in some ways. So I think that I would give it an 8, but with this important caveat.
The goal is the path. I really liked when the Executive Vice President was sort of being pushed on things being hard. She's like, it should be hard. This is hard work. It should be hard. We should like hard. It's like we all should take an oath to being stoic. Margrethe, I know your path in politics was not easy and you've embraced hard. What is your number with the caveats of it's a long, long road?
Well, I would actually say that Europe has to be very careful not to lose the advantage it has when it comes to regulating. And this is not my wish, but this is my assessment of what I think is happening. In the United States, I see rapid catching up, not on the same principles as in Europe, but on the basis of invoking national security or, antitrust rules that are being developed or focusing on threats to democracy in different ways. So I do believe that it has taken the United States a long time to catch up with the awareness of all the harms that come with basically out of balance power for big tech companies. But at the same time, I think when the US acts, it acts fast. And this could actually have implications for Europe's ambitions, which has very much been at the forefront of regulating. Similarly, China is actually catching up in a completely different way, but should also not be underestimated. And the last thing I'd say is that for Europeans to actually succeed in setting standards, the standards also have to be percolating through successful business endeavors. So it cannot just be set by regulating, but there should also be growth, there should be innovation, there should be European successes built on top of these principles that we all hold so dearly. So I think the best thing Europeans can do is not to be complacent and to keep being very, very driven, but not to only celebrate the notion of being a super regulator without adding growth.
Thanks, Margrethe. Maxwell, I hope you're still listening. I think Margrethe is picking up on some of your needing jobs, needing access to capital, sort of growth, how to use technology to build the economy that we want with this great talent that is here in Europe. I'm speaking at an entrepreneur conference tomorrow, and someone's making an argument that Europeans have the best entrepreneurs in the world, and what will happen in a governed world where that can really work. So let's hear what the audience says. So most people said 7. And then as these things go, there's a lot in the middle, but then there's a lot of 3s on the results. So optimism followed by some important skeptics. I want to go to some very specific questions for each of you, and then we're going to answer some of the questions in the chat. So if you can keep your responses quite short. We can't talk about a launch of a center, Danny, and not hear a little bit more about what the center will be doing and what your vision is for this and this big question of digitization of Europe, but also digital governance. So Danny, can you tell us what to expect from this new center?
Sure. So we have discovered that most people, when they imagine the future, they're pretty fearful of digital technology. And I think at the center, we want to contribute to a positive vision of digital governance, of how we can promote public well-being. And we do that by conducting research, teaching, and also outreach activities. And I would say that probably what really makes the Center for Digital Governance special is that we, as a faculty, it brings together a group of people, Joanna Bryson, Gerhard Hammerschmidt, Turit Husted, Luciana Cingolani, Keegan McBride, who earlier also posed a question to the Vice President, who are really committed to not only be stuck in the ivory tower, but reach out and inform policymakers about what we can learn about the consequences or the empirical evidence that informs decision making.
Super. Margrethe, I'm going to go over to you. You have a new academic home in Stanford, so you've been spending a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and there's been some questions here in the chat around what we can learn to do or not do from the American way. And you started talking about that a little bit, but maybe a few things that aren't so obvious as we move forward in figuring out the European way from the Americans, my people.
Yeah, well, it's nice to see the crossovers going in all directions, you know, Americans in Europe, Europeans in America. And I think we need the same kind of crossovers between the worlds of governance and the worlds of technology. And that's what I set out to do at Stanford after serving in the European Parliament. So I'm really happy and wanted to congratulate the Hertie School for this new initiative. And I look forward to fruitful cooperations. But what do I see in the United States? Well, I think one big clear experience after the COVID pandemic is how thin the buffer is for a lot of people. So how the so-called gig economy or so-called platform economy has really meant for people to live as day wagers, not even paycheck by paycheck, because these people do not have paychecks. And when there's a little bit of a crisis, and in this case, a major crisis, it means that a lot of people cannot get by. And I think we have our own problems in Europe, but this is not one of them. We do take better care of people. And I think that the investments in education, in healthcare, in social benefits for those who need it is something unique for Europe. And it may not have been so clear, and there may have been a sort of dreamy ideal of what the major successes of entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley look like. But now that we can see the flip side, the shadow side very clearly, I'm curious to see whether this, for example, could lead to more appreciation for the need to tax tech companies, for example. There's so much revenue and profit being made without taxation. And the question is, if the profits are only going to go to the private sector, but the costs are going to lean on the public, then the imbalance is going to continue. And I personally don't think it's sustainable, but at the end of the day, this is a political question.
big political questions. It'll be so fascinating to see how this unfolds. I know that there's some research going on at the Hertie School coming up on platform economies and governance. So we'll be hearing more about that. Verbaat, you're at the Commission doing the heavy work with all this optimism, with this stoic belief of the long road ahead. What can the Hertie Center do? What can civil society do to support that work and the vision?
Well, I think a key point is to do what we're doing today, is to engage in debate and to kind of discuss the issues and their complexity and their richness and diversity across the continent. I think it's not a top-down initiative in the sense that the Commission makes a proposal, but then there are debates at national level with the Council and the European Parliament, and really these projects are so important and they touch so many different aspects of our lives that the most important part is to research the issues and to debate them, because I think this is the kind of democratic underpinning of our legitimacy to act in the first place. So we can only welcome more debate and more discussions around, like the ones that we're having today. And even without the Commission, because there's no way we'll be able to be everywhere. But the issues that we're talking about today are really at the heart of what the vision is of the Executive Vice President and the leadership of the European Commission at the moment for the next digital decade. And it's really important that this is based on a comprehensive societal debate of how we see the way forward.
Thanks for that. I'm thinking a lot about this call for debate and the European Commission holding the heart of democracy to really do that. And we here in Europe are very happy to be living in this democracy, wanting to protect it, while worldwide people's satisfaction with democracy is going down. And anyone who's watching the US election knows that technology companies and the platform are really impacting democracy. So it seems to me that it is urgent that some of these issues get figured out, or else we won't have as vibrant of democracy. So now I want to go to a speed round. By the way, Danny, I see your colleague Joanna Bryson, who we saw in the video. She's on here on the chat. I'm going to go to a speed round, so I'm going to try to direct these to each of you. If you could just answer as quick off the top, and then we're going to have one last poll, and it's already an hour. How did that happen? So this is going to go to you, Margrethe. Nuria says, why is it that big tech companies are still paying such low taxes? If this is a problem, we know it. Why is it still happening?
There's no political appetite in the United States to get this done either domestically or internationally at the OECD, which is basically the platform where this is the most advanced discussion. And there's just some news out today that it looks like the perspectives, the horizons are postponed again. And I think that it may actually lead to countries, there's been speak of this by France and other countries, to basically act regardless of a global agreement. And I think that would be a missed opportunity. But at the same time, the legitimacy for not doing anything is eroding very quickly. So the pressure on governments to act is big. Let's see whether the US election will change anything. I'm not too hopeful, but it could change the view to alliances and the appreciation for, again, balancing private and corporate profits with societal needs, especially now.
Thanks, Margrethe. I'm going to ask another political question. It was the last one to come in via anonymous. And Danny or Verbaat, you tell me which one of you wants to answer this. If this is all and ultimately a political question, how far can we go if we don't address our fractured political landscape, sort of polarization, which may be a topic that you're going to be studying at the Hertie School? So maybe Danny, I'll throw it to you. Like, shouldn't we be studying that in the role of the internet? Don't we have to tackle that in order to get to good governance?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question because social media are nowadays blamed for everything, including polarization and so forth. But if you really look into the causes of polarization, you find that a lot of the causes, at least in the US, are related to migration, people moving to areas where you have Whole Foods, you have yoga centers for the Democrats, and then certain kinds of churches for the Republicans. But I do strongly believe that social media act as a catalyzer So of course we also have to tackle these issues through other means, but we can also deal with them to a certain extent when we deal with digital technology.
Super. So thanks, Prabhat. This one's going to be for you. Will be our last question, and then while he's answering it, if my friend, the tech guy, Sebastian, there's real people behind making this happen. So big gratitude to all the people who are doing that. Mackenzie Nelson of Algorithm Watch asks, how is the Commission thinking about meaningful transparency? You talked about the value of transparency. Are you auditing frameworks for algorithmic systems on the table? So how are you doing transparency? And while you're answering, a poll's going to come up basically asking you, leaving this conversation, this exciting launch. I feel like we need champagne or Prosecco. Yeah, there's both European popping. Really deep, dear congratulations to you and all of your colleagues. It's really extraordinary. We need you. We need this momentum. You're going to have a chance to vote. Are you feeling more optimistic about a European way and our ability to do this long road in a time frame, less or the same? So, Sebastian, if you could put that poll up. But on this meaningful transparency, Prabhat, could you explain what you're thinking about the Commission very shortly?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we want to be clear about is that transparency for whom and about what. So transparency for users is not the same as transparency for regulators and transparency for people who exercise oversight, or transparency towards researchers who might be scrutinizing what's going on the platform. So that's one way of breaking it down. And when we speak about meaningful transparency on an algorithmic system, there's a question that really can only be answered about experts. Are they really discriminatory, or are they kind of amplifying hateful content? This is something that an ordinary citizen cannot really be asked to check. And so the transparency towards users needs to be somewhat different. It needs to aim at empowering users that they have choices or meaningful alternatives in the way that content is kind of presented to them. So these are the kind of avenues by which we kind of break down the question of transparency by being clearer about what kind of transparency, for which purpose, and towards whom.
Thanks so much. Joanna Bryson says, just on this question of urgency, if we don't get this resolved in 5 years, then we won't be able to address the climate crisis. So we better do it in 5 years. What we're doing now is very urgent, and it matters. And I know you're going to take that at the Hertie Center very strongly. I'm going to read out in just a minute the final results. But I just quickly, Danny, could you say 30 seconds on what we're seeing in the Global South? We've been talking a lot about Europe and China, or anyone who wants to answer this. Any insights about how digital governance is being addressed, handled, made inclusive in this global approach?
Yeah, so I can't talk about the whole Global South because I've been working on China for 20 years, but China is very actively exporting the Chinese model. It has held a world conference on internet issues annually since 2014, and many of the representatives that are coming to these events are from Russia, Pakistan, Iran, Central Asia. So I think the Chinese model is going to catch up, but of course not everywhere in the Global South.
We just heard from Gayatri Doctors. It would be great to connect with the Center for Digital Governance from India enjoying this session. So here we go, lots of partnership. So we have left a bunch of us more optimistic, most of us the same. And I think that's just the complexity of the issue. And I want to give the last word to each of your speakers. One last word, Danny, on what the center will be doing, just in a word.
Oh, in a word, we're going to promote good models for digital governance.
There you go. A sentence is good. Prabhat, a word to leave us optimistic, or a sentence?
Opportunity. I think this is let's look ahead, hopeful towards a brighter future. I think it can be done.
Yeah, we definitely, Ray Bradbury said that humans start off with a romance before it comes reality. And I think we need to be living in a romance of a digital world that works for all of us. Margrethe, what is your romance or a word you want to leave us with?
Cooperation. I hope there will be a lot of fruitful cooperations coming to and from the center, and that between the worlds of good governance in general, and technology, there will be mutual learning. There's often a trend to say, oh, policymakers and lawmakers don't know anything about technology, and then often people laugh. But clearly there's a lot of learning to go around when it comes to engineers that could use some learning about democracy and the rule of law. So I hope there will be cooperation and mutual exchange of knowledge.
We've had two great politicians, the Executive Vice President and Margrethe here, as examples of people who are in politics and really care. And my last word is really grateful. Grateful for all of you that have tuned in. Grateful for the HETI School, the European Commission. We all could be doing lots of things with our time. That we choose to do this really matters. Joanna Bryson said we have 5 years. We have elections coming up. This is the heart of democracy and the heart of human existence, not overplaying it. This is really fundamental stuff. So everyone keep collaborating, keep optimistic, and know that it's hard, but hard is good. So thanks everyone for joining. Congratulations to the HETI Center. Thanks Margrethe, thanks Prabhat.
Thanks, bye
Thanks
everybody.
Danny. Thanks to all the team who put it together.
Thank you.
Check us out. Bye.